Hello, my name is Charlene Lawrence and I am a licensed acupuncturist. If you are watching this video, it's likely because you are going through the grieving process right now, and I would like to teach you a technique to help you get through that process a little more smoothly and move on to your regular daily tasks. Unfortunately, when it comes to grief, the world keeps spinning and continues on, whereas the person who is grieving doesn't want the world to keep spinning as normal or can't accept that. And so this technique is going to help you get through the grieving process so that you can move on to your regular tasks, get back to work, interact with coworkers, interact with family, friends, and not have the grief stifle your daily life as much as it has been up until this point. First of all, I wanted to tell you that I'm so sorry for your loss, and I'm so sorry that you're going through this experience. This technique can be used for any type of grief. It can be for grief in the most basic sense, where you've lost somebody that you love. That could be a parent, a spouse, a best friend, a child, a pet. And it can also be used for grieving through the loss of a relationship or the loss of anything that really requires the grieving process to move on to the next stage of your life. Now, all emotions are valid and they all have their own specific timeline. However, that is different person by person. So if you feel like you've been grieving for many years, it could be a decade or more, this may be your natural timeline to grieve. But if this grief is still interrupting your daily life at this point, then this technique will at least get you to a point where it will no longer interrupt you on a regular basis. I'm going to go over some housekeeping items before we actually get onto the technique. So the technique we're going to use is called tapping, or EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique. And this is exactly what it does. It frees you from these emotions so that you can continue on with your life as usual. Now, I've taught tapping for many emotions, and this can be used for any emotion. You would just plug in whatever emotion you're experiencing right now. Instead of the word grief, you just plug in whatever emotion you're going through: anxiety, sadness, anger, anything like that. Plug that in instead of the word grief, and this will get you through that experience. The little caveat in doing the technique for grief is that when you lose somebody that you love that's close to you, even a relationship, if you lose a relationship that's been an important part of your life for many years, you are never going to 100% be back to the way it was when that person was in your life. Grief is a unique experience because you never forget the person. Let's say you have the loss of a parent. You'll never forget them, and this technique is not intended to make you feel that way, make you feel like you are forgetting or not honoring their memory. This technique is purely to reduce the symptoms related to grief so that you can move on and honor their memory and remember the beautiful, wonderful times that you had with this person, rather than being stuck in the process of missing them every day. This technique is not going to stop you from missing that person. But like I said, it'll help you to not have the grief interrupt your daily life any longer. All right, next housekeeping item. When we're tapping through the points, I want you to be as specific as you can. I am going to lead you through the words you're going to say in a very generalized manner. If you can follow along and add specificity to it, that will be more helpful for you. If you cannot, don't worry, this technique will still be beneficial. So here's an example of how we're going to line up these phrases in a general way versus a non-specific way. So the general terms that I'm going to use are things like this grief that I'm experiencing. If you're able to make it specific when you practice or follow along with this recording, I want you to be specific. Let's say my cat Whiskers has died and I am grieving the loss of my cat. So I want you to make that specific, or if that's your scenario. So as I say generally, this grief that I'm experiencing, if you can, please plug in the specific experience as this grief that I'm experiencing from the loss of my cat Whiskers, or whatever your situation is. Specificity isn't required, like I said, but if you can make it work and be more specific, the more effective this technique is going to be. I already mentioned that this can be used for any emotion. Like I said, just plug in, we're talking about grief today. If you're experiencing anxiety, you can substitute that word, anxiety or stress, for grief. I also want to explain that in my experience, the most commonly used tapping technique comes from a man named Nick Ortner, or his sister Jessica Ortner. She also does a lot of tapping videos. They have a lot of Facebook groups, and they have wonderful tapping meditations. The tapping we're going to do, we're going to change up the points a little bit. And so this is a more comprehensive tapping sequence that we're going to go through, and it's based on the information from a guy named Gary Craig, who I believe Nick Ortner trained with. And Nick Ortner has kind of just streamlined the tapping a little bit further from Gary's teachings. I'm going to go back to Gary's teachings in this instance. Like I said, they're more comprehensive, and it's really because all of these points that we're going to tap on are actually acupuncture points, and Gary's point sequence makes a lot of sense to me as to why we're going to add these couple extra points in. And you don't need to know or understand anything about why we're doing the points. It's entirely effective without that understanding. So I'm not going to get into the minutia of that, but go ahead and just roll with it. It looks and seems odd, but it's extremely effective. All right, so I would like to show you before we move on what the points are, just where we're going to be tapping. This is all really simple. You can do it with 2 hands or 1. I tend to use both hands. It doesn't matter. You can do 1 hand, 2 hands. It's still extremely effective. All right, so the points we're going to do, get my hair out of the way. We're going to start right here on the chest. So find your collarbone, and then you're going to come about, a finger's width down, and there's a nice little depression there. It's in between one of the ribs. You don't have to get these points exact. It doesn't matter, but just find your collarbone about 1 hand width down, and right here, we're just going to rub. You can go outside, outwards, inwards. I do have my own philosophy on this, but I've seen people do it either direction, and it's still extremely effective. So this is the first point we're going to tap. We're going to say a setup statement. While we're doing this, we say it 3 times, and then we're going to move on to the points. The first point we're going to do is right here at the inside of the eyebrow, so you're just going to tap right there. The next point is right outside the eye, kind of at the outside edge of the eyebrow. We'll tap there. Next one's going to be underneath the eye, and then we move under the nose. We'll move under the mouth, down to the collarbone, and then we're going to do the medial side of our wrist, and we're actually going to tap this whole width of our wrist. So we're just going to tap this way, both directions, And this is actually hitting up 3 important emotional channels on the hand. After we do the hand, we're going to move under the arm. So if you're a woman, this is going to be an easy point to find. It's right where the band of the bra goes across. If you're a man, it's about 1 hand width down from the crease of your armpit, just right there. And remember, you don't have to get these points exact. We're going to be using, all 4 fingers, 2 fingers. You're going to have a nice range going on. After that, we're going to tap a point that's underneath the breast. Let me adjust my screen here. So again, for women, this point is really easy. It's right where the underwire or the bottom of your bra would be. For men, it's about a hand width below where your nipple is. So this one's a little challenging to find, and this is one of the points that's been removed when Nick Ortner does his teachings, and I purely think it's just because it's kind of an awkward spot to teach people, but it's very important with my understanding of Chinese medicine and the acupuncture points. I very much understand why this point is used, and so I want to keep it in the sequence. And then the very last point is going to be the top of our head. And this is the one that I find the most funny. And so we're going to tap the top of our head. And what I like to think of is like we're little monkeys tapping or scratching our heads. Before we get all the way into this, let me adjust my screen again. I do want to mention it's very common to have an emotional release during this experience, and those typically come in 2 forms, either crying or laughing. If you find yourself in a fit of crying or even in a fit of laughter, this is a really good sign, and it means that these emotions are physically being released from your body. They are coming out of your physiology and no longer impacting your body. So if this happens, just keep going and do the best you can, get through it. We're going to go through the sequence 3 times, and then we've got some more information at the end. So the first thing I want you to do is I want you to gauge where you're feeling. So sit into your body, see how you're feeling, and give that grief a number on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 being the most grief you feel that you can ever experience, 1 being the lowest amount of grief. Typically, when I do tapping with other emotional situations or even pain, I work to get my patients down to a 0. When it comes to grief, it's never going to fully 100% go away, in my opinion. So our target this time is to get down to a 1. So give yourself a number on a scale of 1 to 10 of your grief. Let's say the grief is very fresh and new, and it was a significant person in your life that you've lost, and you might be starting at a 10. So I'm going to assume here, check in. I'm going to pretend that I am grieving at the most grief I can possibly imagine, and that is going to be a 10. So we're going to start with our setup statement, and we're going to start on point number 1. So again, find that point about a hand's width down from the collarbone and just start rubbing right here. This might be a very tender spot. That's common. That's okay. You don't have to press too hard. Just go ahead and give that a little bit of pressure. And we're going to start with our setup statement 3 times. Get ready. Repeat after me. Even though I am feeling all of this grief, I deeply and completely love and accept myself. Even though I am feeling all of this grief, I deeply and completely love and accept myself. Even though I am feeling all of this grief, I deeply and completely love and accept myself. Moving on to point number 1, inside the eyebrow. All of this grief that I'm feeling, outside the eye. I am grieving, under the eye. All of this grief, under the nose. This grief has a hold of me, on the chin. All of this grief that I feel. at the collarbone, all of this grief that I feel. Under the arm, this grief is just unbearable. At the wrist, I am feeling all of this grief. Under the breast, this grief is just so painful. At the top of the head, I am grieving and it hurts. Inside the eyebrow, this grief is so painful. Outside the eye, this grief is just unbearable. Under the eye, I don't want to grieve anymore. Under the nose, I don't want to feel this pain anymore. On the chin, I'm so frustrated that no one else is grieving with me. Collarbone, this grief. Under the arm, this grief is so painful. At the wrist, my grief is so painful. Under the breast, I'm grieving and it hurts. Top of the head, I don't want to grieve any longer. Inside the eyebrow, this pain is so unbearable. Outside the eye, the grief is just so hard to deal with. Under the eye, this grief keeps interrupting my life. Under the nose, I'm so angry about losing this person I love. On the chin, this grief is melting away. Collarbone, I'm ready to honor this person's memory. Under the arm, I'm ready to be happy again. On the wrist, this grief will no longer have a hold of me. Under the breast, I am ready to move on from this grief. Top of the head, this grief is melting away. Now I want you to check in with how you're feeling. Check in with your number that you set before we started the tapping sequence. This was one round of tapping. We went through the points 3 times, which is one round. I started off the sequence with a scenario of having grief at a level of 10 out of 10. I want you to check in with your body and see where you feel. Perhaps your grief went down a couple points. Maybe it went down by half. I want you to reassign that number, and what you're going to do is back up this video to when we start the tapping sequence, and you're going to go through that round again and again until you get your grief down to a 1 or a 0 if it's possible. If you feel like you're not feeling the grief at all, then that's wonderful. So go ahead, back up the video to the sequence where we start the tapping sequence. You're going to start right here at the setup statement again. Now, if your grief came down to a point where it's only about a 3 or a 4, if you only have those few points left, I want you to start the setup the setup statement differently. You're still going to rub this point one hand width down, but the statement is going to go, even though I still feel some of this grief, I deeply and completely love and accept myself. Even though I have this remaining grief, I deeply and completely love and accept myself. Even though I still have this remaining grief, I deeply and completely love and accept myself. And then you will start the tapping sequence again. And using these words like still and remaining helps to really get rid of those last couple of points on that scale. We have one more step that we're going to do, and this is the point when you get yourself down to that lowest feeling, that lowest number that we can possibly get to, when you get your grief down to that feeling of a number 1. We are going to do this step, and what it's going to do is solidify in our bodies, in our physiology, and in our subconscious mind. It's going to keep this feeling at that low level, and it's going to prevent it from returning or rebounding back to a higher number. So what we're going to do is we're going to find a spot on the back of our hand. So this is in the metacarpal region between our pinky and our ring finger. I want you to find where those two metacarpals meet. Again, the point doesn't have to be exactly specific. We're going to use a couple fingers to tap, and so you'll get that range in the area, but we're going to tap on this point right here where those two metacarpal bones come together between the pinky and the ring finger. And so we're going to start tapping. This is the really awkward point of this tapping sequence. However, it's extremely important that we do it to settle in this rewiring that we're doing to our brain and our emotions. So let's go ahead and tap. Now that my grief is under control, I am feeling complete again. Now that my grief is under control, I am feeling complete again. Now that my grief is under control, I am feeling complete again. Now I want you to do some eye movements. I want you to look up and to the right, back to neutral, up and to the left, back to neutral, down and to the right, back to neutral, down and to the left, back to neutral. Now circle your eyes around. If you have a difficult time, go ahead and follow my finger. I want you to circle your eyes one direction and then circle them back the other direction. Good, last 2 steps. I want you to hum a little tune, make it up. And count up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Count down, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Those are just some symbols and information that can communicate with the subconscious mind, and that's why we do those couple of things. We use the eye movements to be able to cross the hemispheres of the brain from either the left to the right or the right to the left, and we're just connecting the information within the brain. That was it. That was the last step in this process. Please go ahead and use this video as often as you need to. And like I said, when you get to the point where you bring the number of whatever situation you're working on, when you bring that number on the scale down to as low as you possibly can, if you keep dropping a couple points, just rewind back to where we start the setup statement in the sequence when we rub the point on our chest, and go through the sequence several times. I find that most people require about 3 rounds of tapping before they get their emotional level down to that lowest point. So give it a try for 3 rounds, see how you feel, check in, and please leave me a comment or reach out to me if you need any help or assistance in getting through this time. Again, I'm so sorry for your loss, and I wish you the best on your journey. Have a great day.